My name is Daniel Hayes. I'm 30 years old now. But the morning this story really began, I was 27 and standing in my parents' kitchen before sunrise. The kitchen lights were too bright for that hour. The smell of coffee and fried bacon hung in the air, heavy and warm. Outside, the Florida humidity pressed against the windows like fog. I had just finished a night shift at a warehouse. My shoulders ached. My boots felt heavy. All I wanted was a quick breakfast before a medical appointment I'd waited 3 months to get. I reached for a piece of bacon on the plate near the stove. My mother didn't even turn around. "Don't touch that," she said. Her voice was calm. Sharp, but calm. "That's for your brother." I paused with my hand halfway to the plate. "I've been at work since 8 last night," I said quietly. "I just want one piece." "There's cereal," she said, pointing toward the pantry with the spatula. "The cheap kind." I stood there for a second. Then I took my hand back. I poured a bowl of stale cornflakes and sat at the small table by the window. The kitchen clock ticked loudly on the wall. That was the moment my younger brother Ethan walked in. He looked rested. Silk pajama pants, expensive sneakers, hair still messy from sleep. He sat down at the table like the whole room had been prepared for him. My mother slid a plate in front of him. "Eggs, pancakes, bacon, fruit." "Morning, sweetheart," she said. Ethan nodded, already eating. He didn't look at me. He never really did. To him, I was something between a roommate and a piece of furniture. Someone who existed in the house but didn't require attention. A minute passed. Then he spoke with his mouth full. "Dan," he said, "you're driving me to campus today." It wasn't a request. I set my spoon down slowly. "I can't," I said. He looked up. "I have a doctor's appointment at 8:15, I continued. "Across town." He leaned back in his chair. "Then reschedule it." I watched him for a moment. "My car's empty," he added. "Forgot to fill up my Porsche." That was another thing. My brother drove a Porsche Macan my father had bought him 6 months earlier. A reliable vehicle for a future executive, my father had said proudly. Meanwhile, I drove a 12-year-old Toyota sedan with a cracked windshield and an air conditioner that only blew warm air. I paid for my own insurance, my own gas, my own repairs, and $800 a month in rent to live in my childhood bedroom. "Use your credit card," I said quietly. "It's maxed," he replied. "Then walk." He stared at me. "Seriously?" "Yes." He dropped his fork. "Mom," he said. She turned around immediately. "Daniel is being difficult again." She wiped her hands on a towel and walked toward us. "What's the problem now?" she asked. "He won't drive me," Ethan said. My mother looked at me like I had just broken a rule. "Daniel," she said, "your brother has class. I have a medical appointment." She waved her hand dismissively. "You're fine," she said. "You're built like an ox." My throat tightened. That appointment wasn't routine. For the past year, I'd been dealing with a thyroid condition. Lately, there had been swelling in my neck and a constant pressure near my throat. The specialist wanted an ultrasound, possibly a biopsy. I hadn't told my parents how worried I was, mostly because I already knew the answer. "Mom," I said calmly, "this appointment took 3 months to schedule." "Your brother's education comes first," she replied. I felt something settle quietly inside me. Not anger, just clarity. "No," I said. The word felt strange in my mouth. I had never said it before. The room went still. My mother stepped closer. "What did you say?" she asked. I said no, I repeated. I picked up my keys from the counter. "I'm going to the doctor." Her hand moved before my brain had time to react. The sound was sharp. A single crack in the quiet kitchen. My head snapped sideways as her palm hit the side of my face. For a moment, everything went white. I tasted blood where I'd bitten my tongue. My ear rang like a fire alarm. When my vision cleared, I saw my brother still sitting at the table. He was smiling. And at that exact moment, the back door opened and my father walked into the kitchen. He took one look at the room. Then he said something I still remember word for word. "Daniel," he said, wiping grease from his hands, "stop being selfish and take your brother to school." I touched the side of my face. She just hit me. He didn't even look at the mark. Instead, he pointed toward Ethan. "His future actually matters," he said. Then he added one sentence that stayed with me for years. "What are you worth anyway?" The kitchen went quiet again, and something inside me changed. But the strangest part of that morning didn't happen in that kitchen. It happened later that day, in a doctor's office, when someone looked at the bruise on my face and handed me a pamphlet that would eventually lead to a police report, a courtroom, and a stack of financial documents that explained everything. I didn't know it yet, But that slap had just started something none of us could stop. So I grabbed my keys, walked out the door, and drove toward my appointment. Then I waited. The clinic waiting room was quiet when I arrived. It smelled like antiseptic and old magazines. A television in the corner played a daytime talk show with the volume turned low. Someone flipped through pages of a newspaper near the window. I sat down in the far chair and kept my head slightly turned away from the room. The left side of my face was warm. I could feel the skin swelling where my mother's hand had landed. A little girl sitting across from me stared for a moment. Her mother noticed and gently turned her back toward a coloring book. I pulled my baseball cap down a little lower. Then I waited. After about 10 minutes, the nurse opened the door. Daniel Hayes. I stood and followed her down the hallway. The exam room was small. Pale walls. Stainless steel equipment. The paper on the examination table crinkled when I sat down. I stared at the floor tiles while I waited. A minute later, the door opened again. Dr. Ramirez walked in holding a clipboard. She had been treating my thyroid condition for almost 2 years. Calm voice. Steady eyes. The kind of doctor who paid attention to small details. She stopped halfway across the room. Daniel, she said slowly. Her eyes moved to my face. What happened? I tried to smile. It hurt. Ran into a door, I said. It was a weak answer. She stepped closer and tilted my chin slightly with her fingers. Her touch was gentle, but deliberate. She studied the mark. Then she said quietly, "Doors don't usually leave fingerprints." For a moment, neither of us spoke. I looked down at the floor. "It's handled," I said. "Can we just check my neck?" She watched me for a few seconds. Then she nodded once. "All right," she said. The ultrasound machine hummed softly while she worked. The gel on my neck felt cold against my skin. I stared up at the ceiling tiles, counting the small holes in the acoustic panels. It was a habit I'd developed over the years when I needed to stay calm. After a few minutes, she turned the screen slightly away and wiped the gel from my neck. "The nodules haven't grown much," she said. "That's good." She sat on the small rolling stool and folded her hands. "But your cortisol levels are extremely high." I nodded. "I've been working a lot." "I know," she said. Then she added something in the same steady tone. "Daniel, stress is making your condition worse." She opened a drawer in the counter behind her and pulled out a folded pamphlet. "This program started last year," she said, handing it to me. I looked down at the cover. St. Joseph Medical Center Certified Nursing Assistant Program. Accelerated track. I frowned slightly. "I can't afford school," I said. "It's paid training." That made me look up. She continued calmly. "You train 6 days a week. You receive a stipend during the program. After certification, you work at the hospital and can apply for the RN Bridge program." I held the paper in my hands. The pages felt heavier than they should have. "I've worked warehouses my whole life," I said. "I don't have medical training." "You have something else," she replied. "What?" "Patience." She leaned back slightly in her chair. "I've watched you in the waiting room for 2 years," she said. "You help elderly patients fill out forms. You hold the door for people who move slowly. You explain things to them when the nurses are busy." I hadn't realized she noticed those things. Then she said something simple. "We need people like that." I sat there quietly. Finally, I asked, "What do I do?" "You go talk to the program director. Call him." "No," she smiled faintly. "Walk in." Then she wrote a name and office number on the back of the pamphlet. "Carlos Vargas. Tell him Dr. Ramirez sent you." I left the clinic 20 minutes later. The Florida sun was bright when I stepped outside. The heat hit my face, but the air felt strangely light. I sat in my old Toyota for a moment with the pamphlet resting on the steering wheel. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine something different. Not just surviving. Something else. Then I started the car. Instead of driving back home, I drove to the hospital. The administrative offices were on the 3rd floor. When I knocked on the door labeled training programs, a voice inside said, "Come in." The man behind the desk looked like he had been working there for decades. Short, thick mustache, rolled up sleeves. He glanced up once. Then his eyes went straight to the bruise on my face. "Ramirez's referral?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded once and pushed a chair toward me. "Sit." I sat. He leaned back and folded his arms. "Can you handle blood?" he asked. "Yes." "Vomit?" "Yes." "Patients yelling at you when you're trying to help them?" I thought about my house for a moment. "Yes." A corner of his mouth moved slightly. "Good," he said. Then he slid a packet of papers across the desk. "Training starts Monday, 6 a.m. sharp." I blinked. That's it. That's it." I started filling out the forms. Halfway through, my pen paused over one line. Emergency contact. I stared at the blank space for a few seconds. Then I left it empty. When I handed the papers back, Mr. Vargas looked at them quickly. Then he asked one last question. You got somewhere stable to live? I hesitated. I'm working on it. He nodded slowly. Then he grabbed a sticky note and wrote down a phone number. My friend owns a small garage apartment near the hospital, he said. Cheap rent. Quiet neighborhood. He slid the note toward me. You look like someone who could use quiet. I folded the note carefully and put it in my pocket. When I walked out of the hospital that afternoon, I realized something for the first time. I had a plan, a job, possibly even a new place to live. But there was one problem left. Everything I owned was still in my parents' house, and I knew exactly what would happen if I tried to move out while they were home. So I sat in my car, took out my phone, and started thinking through the next steps. I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I went to the diner where I sometimes picked up lunch shifts after my warehouse job. It was a narrow place on the corner of an old strip mall. The windows always smelled faintly of grease and coffee. The late afternoon crowd was small. A couple of truck drivers. One older man reading a newspaper. Behind the counter, Marcus was working the grill. Marcus had been the short-order cook there for years. Thin guy, sleeves rolled up, tattoos climbing up his forearms like vines. He noticed the bruise on my face before I even sat down. He turned the heat down under the grill. Daniel, he said quietly, who hit you? I slid onto the stool and rested my elbows on the counter. My mom, I said. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he wiped his hands on a towel and leaned against the counter. Tell me what happened. So I did. Not quickly, just the facts. The kitchen that morning. The argument. The slap. The doctor's appointment. The training program. The apartment lead. Marcus listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly. Tonight's Tuesday, he said. I looked up. Yeah. Your family still goes to that steakhouse every Tuesday night. I thought about it. They have been doing that for years. My parents and my brother went out to dinner together every Tuesday. Same restaurant. Same table. I had never been invited. They leave around 6:30, I said. Marcus pushed himself off the counter. I get off at 6, he said. Then he grabbed his truck keys from the hook near the register. We'll move your stuff tonight. I blinked. You don't have to. I know, he said calmly. But we're doing it anyway. He picked up the grill spatula again and flipped a row of burgers. 2 hours, he added. In and out. I nodded once. Then I waited. I spent the rest of the afternoon at the public library. Quiet place. Cool air. Rows of computers and the soft sound of keyboards clicking. At one point I turned my phone back on. 14 missed calls. 7 texts. All from home. Most of them short. Where are you? You owe your brother an apology. You embarrassed this family. One message from my father simply said, be home by dinner. I read them once. Then I turned the phone back off. And I waited. At 6:50 that evening, Marcus pulled his old pickup truck around the corner near my street. The sky was already turning dark. You ready? He asked. I nodded. We drove the rest of the block without speaking. My parents' house looked exactly the same as it always had. 2 stories. Wide porch. The Porsche wasn't in the driveway. That meant they were already gone. I unlocked the front door. The house smelled faintly like lemon cleaner. Marcus stepped inside behind me and looked around. So this is the kingdom, he said quietly. I didn't answer. I went straight upstairs. My room was small. Twin bed. A dresser I'd had since middle school. 3 cardboard boxes stacked near the wall. I didn't own much. Clothes. Laptop. Old PlayStation. A small metal lockbox with my birth certificate and social security card. Marcus grabbed a trash bag from the closet and tossed it toward me. Start packing. We moved quickly. Shirts. Shoes. Papers. Everything went into bags and boxes. 3 trips down the stairs. When I carried the last bag into the kitchen, I stopped for a moment. The breakfast dishes from that morning were still sitting on the table. Egg yolk dried against the plate. Half a glass of orange juice. They had expected me to come home and clean it. I opened the drawer near the refrigerator and took out a small notepad. Then I wrote 3 words. I quit. I stuck the note to the refrigerator with a magnet. Marcus looked at it. Short and clear, he said. We carried the final box out to the truck. The night air felt cooler than usual. When the truck doors closed, the house behind us looked strangely quiet. Like it had already forgotten I lived there. Marcus started the engine. Where to? He asked. I pulled the sticky note from my pocket. The number Mr. Vargas had written down. Garage apartment, I said. 5 miles from the hospital. He nodded. Good. We drove through the quiet streets without music. 10 minutes later, we turned onto a narrow gravel driveway beside a small one-story house. A light was on in the garage. An older man stepped outside, wiping his hands with a rag. You Hayes? He asked. Yes, sir. Vargas called. He pointed toward a small staircase beside the garage. Apartments upstairs. Then he added something simple. $100 a month. Water included. Marcus looked at me. I nodded immediately. Deal. The key was under the welcome mat. The room upstairs was small. One bed. A tiny kitchenette. One window with an air conditioner humming softly. But when I closed the door behind me, something happened I hadn't felt in years. Silence. Real silence. No shouting. No television blaring. No footsteps in the hallway. I sat down on the edge of the bed. Marcus leaned against the doorframe. You good? He asked. I took a slow breath. Yeah, I said. And for the first time in a very long time. I meant it. The training program started the following Monday. 6 in the morning. Sharp. The work was exhausting. Hospital hallways before sunrise. The smell of disinfectant. The sound of machines beeping steadily beside patient beds. We learned how to lift patients without hurting our backs. How to check blood pressure. How to change sheets while someone was still lying in the bed. The instructor, a former Army medic named Miguel, ran the class like a drill sergeant. Hayes, he said one afternoon, you're apologizing too much. I looked up from the chart in my hands. What? You said sorry 5 times in the last 10 minutes, he said. I hadn't noticed. He folded his arms. You're allowed to take up space, he said. Stand up straight. I did. And I kept working. Weeks passed. My phone stayed off most of the time. I focused on training, on work, on sleeping in a quiet room above a garage. My neck swelling slowly started to go down after Dr. Ramirez adjusted my medication. For a while, I thought the worst part of my life had ended. Then one afternoon, I walked into a bank to open my first personal account, and the man behind the desk said something that made my entire world stop. Mr. Hayes, he said slowly, why didn't you mention your other credit accounts? I stared at him. I don't have any, I said. He turned his computer screen toward me, and that's when I saw the first number, $42,000. Then I sat back in the chair, and I waited. For a moment, I thought there had been a mistake. I leaned closer to the banker's screen and looked at the numbers again. 5 credit cards, 2 personal loans. Balances that added up to just over $42,000. The banker, a quiet man named Trevor, watched my face carefully. You're saying these aren't yours? He asked. I've never had a credit card, I said. He tapped the keyboard again and opened another file. These accounts were opened over the last 4 years, he said. Same address listed on every application. My parents' address. My chest tightened slightly. Can you print this? I asked. He nodded. A few minutes later, he handed me a stack of papers clipped neatly together. Credit reports, transaction histories, application records. I thanked him, folded the documents carefully, and walked out of the bank. The afternoon sun felt bright against the pavement. I sat in my car for a moment without starting the engine. Then I drove back to the garage apartment. That evening, I spread the papers across the small kitchen table. The air conditioner hummed steadily beside the window. I started reading line by line. Best Buy, $1,200 PlayStation console bundle. Macy's, for $130 designer men's clothing. AutoZone, $640 car parts. The shipping address for that order stopped me. Porter Auto Repair, my father's shop. I turned the next page. Porsche Service Center, $2,500 new rims. Tires. Alignment. The date matched a weekend I remembered clearly. My brother had posted photos of the car online that day. I continued reading. Another line appeared near the bottom of the page. University Financial Services, $4,000 tuition payment. My parents had told me for years that Ethan's college tuition came from an inheritance our grandmother left him. Apparently, that wasn't true. I flipped to the credit card applications. Each form had a signature line. My name was printed there. Daniel Hayes, but the handwriting wasn't mine. The capital H had a loop in the middle. My mother always wrote it that way on birthday cards. I sat back in the chair. For a long time, I didn't move. Then I picked up a pen and turned the top sheet over. I started writing. Not emotions. Steps. Step 1. Freeze credit. Step 2. Collect copies of all applications. Step 3. File identity theft report. Step 4. Speak with an attorney. I set the pen down. Then I waited. The next morning before work, I stopped by the hospital cafeteria and called Dr. Ramirez. She answered on the second ring. "Daniel, I need a lawyer," I said. There was a brief pause. "All right," she replied calmly. "What happened?" "I'll explain later," I said. "Do you know anyone who handles identity theft?" She thought for a moment. "Yes," she said. "A woman named Laura Bennett." "Is she good?" Dr. Ramirez gave a quiet laugh. "She doesn't like bullies." "Then she'll probably like this case." Laura Bennett's office was downtown. Small building. Second floor. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. She met me in a narrow conference room with a stack of legal pads under her arm. Short woman. Sharp eyes. Very focused. She listened without interrupting while I explained everything. The house. The credit cards. The signatures. The paperwork from the bank. When I finished, she spread the documents across the table. Her finger moved slowly down the pages. Then she nodded once. "This is identity theft," she said. "And fraud. How serious?" I asked. She leaned back slightly in her chair. "Very." Then she said something that changed the tone of the conversation. "If we pursue this fully, your parents could face criminal charges." I thought about that for a moment. The kitchen that morning. The slap. My father's voice. "What are you worth anyway?" I looked back at the documents on the table. "File it," I said. Laura studied my face for a second. "No hesitation," she said quietly. "I've had time to think," I replied. She nodded once and started writing. "We'll begin with a police report," she said. "Then we notify the credit bureaus and the banks." She paused. "After that, the investigation begins." The process took weeks. Forms, phone calls, affidavits. Laura handled most of it. I focused on work and training at the hospital. Life slowly started forming a new routine. Early mornings, hospital shifts, quiet evenings in the garage apartment. Then one afternoon my phone rang while I was leaving the ER. The caller ID showed Detective Mark Collins. I stepped outside into the parking lot and answered. "Mr. Hayes," he said. "Yes. We've been reviewing records from your father's repair shop," he continued. Something else came up. My grip tightened slightly on the phone. "What kind of something?" "A security camera backup drive," he said. "There's a clip you should see." 2 days later, I sat in a small police office watching a grainy black and white video on a monitor. The timestamp in the corner read, June 14 to 6:22 a.m. The video showed the parking area behind my parents' house. My old Toyota was parked there. The driver's door opened. My father stepped out holding a pair of wire cutters. I watched him walk to the front of the car and lift the hood. He looked around once. Then he leaned forward and cut a wire. The screen froze. Detective Collins folded his hands. "Do you recognize the date?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "That was the day before my entrance exam," I said. The technical school exam I had planned to take years earlier. The morning my car mysteriously wouldn't start. The morning my father told me the repair would be expensive. The morning I missed the test. The detective slid a printed still image across the table. "We believe it shows intent," he said. I stared at the photograph. My father's face was clearly visible. The wire cutters in his hand. The open engine bay. For a moment the room felt very quiet. Then I picked up the photo and placed it neatly on top of the other documents in my folder. "Add it to the case," I said. And then I waited. The investigation moved slowly after that. Weeks turned into months. I didn't hear much at first. That's how most legal processes work. Long periods of silence, followed by short bursts of activity. During that time my life settled into a routine. Hospital shifts started before sunrise. The emergency department was always busy, stretchers rolling through hallways, monitors beeping in steady rhythms, the quiet conversations between nurses during short breaks. The work was hard, but it felt honest. When I went home at night, the garage apartment was still quiet. I kept my small table organized, documents in a folder, bank records in another. I didn't obsess over them, but I kept everything in order. Sometimes Marcus would stop by after his diner shift, and we'd sit outside for a few minutes talking about nothing important. Football, weather, patients who believed they were historical figures. Normal things. Then one afternoon my phone rang while I was finishing paperwork at the nurse's station. It was Laura Bennett. "It's happening," she said. "What is?" "The warrants were signed this morning." I stood up slowly and walked toward the hallway where it was quieter. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means the police are making arrests today." Her voice remained calm, professional. "Your parents will be taken into custody for identity theft and fraud." I looked down the hallway. A patient transport cart rolled past quietly. "All right," I said. "We'll talk again soon," she replied. The call ended. I put the phone face down in my pocket. Then I went back to work. Later that evening, Detective Collins called. He spoke in the same steady tone he had used the first time we met. "Your parents were arrested at 7 this morning," he said. "Your mother was at home. Your father was at his shop." He paused. "Your brother was there when officers arrived." I listened. "The Porsche was seized as evidence," he continued. "Turns out the purchase was tied to one of the credit accounts opened under your name." That didn't surprise me. "Thank you for letting me know," I said. "Next step is arraignment," he replied. "You'll likely be called as a witness later." I thanked him again. Then the call ended. The arraignment took place 2 weeks later. The courthouse downtown was older than most buildings around it. Tall windows, marble floors that echoed quietly under footsteps. Laura met me in the hallway outside the courtroom. "You don't have to sit up front," she said. "I'm fine here." So we took seats near the back. The room filled slowly. A few reporters, several lawyers, court officers moving quietly between rows. Then the side door opened and the defendants were brought in. My parents looked smaller than I remembered. My mother wore a plain gray suit. My father stood beside her, shoulders stiff, jaw tight. My brother Ethan sat in the gallery behind the defense table. He looked nervous. The judge entered and everyone stood. The charges were read carefully. Identity theft, credit fraud, wire fraud, tax violations related to purchases made through the shop. The numbers were listed clearly. Amounts, dates, accounts. When the judge announced bail, $100,000 each, the room went quiet. Their assets had already been frozen during the investigation. They couldn't pay. The hearing ended quickly after that. As people stood to leave, my father turned and saw me sitting in the back row. For a moment our eyes met. He didn't speak. The bailiff directed him toward the side door. Then they were gone. The trial began 6 months later. By that point I had finished my CNA certification and started working full shifts in the hospital. Life felt more stable. But the courtroom still carried a certain weight. Laura prepared everything carefully. Boxes of records, copies of the credit applications, bank statements, shipping receipts, security footage. When it was my turn to testify, she asked questions slowly and clearly. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "did you authorize any of the credit accounts opened in your name?" "No." "Did you authorize the purchase of the Porsche vehicle?" "No." "What vehicle do you personally drive?" "A 2009 Toyota sedan." She nodded and moved to the next document. Each answer stayed simple. Facts only. No speeches. No arguments. The most important moment came later. Laura asked the court to display a piece of evidence marked Exhibit G. The photograph Detective Collins had shown me months earlier appeared on the large screen beside the jury box. My father standing over the open hood of my car. Wire cutters in his hand. The timestamp clearly visible. Laura turned back toward me. "Mr. Hayes," she said calmly, "do you recognize the dates shown in this image?" "Yes." "What was scheduled for you that day?" "My entrance exam for technical school." "And were you able to attend?" "No, why not?" "My car wouldn't start that morning." The courtroom remained very quiet. Laura didn't need to say anything else. The image spoke for itself. The defense attempted to argue that I had given verbal permission for the accounts, that the purchases had been family decisions. But the documents told a different story. Application signatures that didn't match my handwriting. Receipts shipped to addresses I had never used. Payments tied directly to my brother's purchases. Then a final witness appeared unexpectedly. A young woman named Claire. She had dated my brother during his first year at college. When asked whether Ethan regularly attended classes, she answered simply, "No." She explained that he had dropped out early. Most of the tuition payments had been spent on car upgrades and gaming equipment. The jury listened quietly. When deliberations began, the courtroom emptied slowly. Laura and I waited in the hallway outside. 3 hours later, the bailiff called everyone back inside. The verdict was read without drama. Guilty on all counts. My parents stood motionless while the judge thanked the jury for their service. The sentencing hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later. As people began to leave the courtroom, my father walked past the row where I was standing. He stopped for a moment beside me. "You happy now?" he asked quietly. His voice sounded tired. I met his eyes. "No," I said. Then I picked up my folder. And I waited for the sentencing date. The sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks later. By then the case files had grown into several thick folders. Financial records, witness statements, photographs, transcripts. Laura carried most of them in 2 neat boxes and placed them beside our seats at the prosecution table. The courtroom was quieter than it had been during the trial. Fewer reporters, fewer observers. Sentencing hearings rarely attract crowds. By that point, the facts are already established. The judge entered and reviewed the file for several minutes before speaking. He summarized the timeline slowly. Multiple credit accounts opened under my name. Purchases made over several years. Vehicle payments. Retail purchases. Shop equipment and auto parts. Then he mentioned the photograph from the security camera. The one showing my father cutting the ignition wire in my car before the entrance exam I had planned to take years earlier. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at my parents. "This case," he said calmly, "represents a severe breach of financial and familial trust." There was no anger in his voice, just clarity. The sentences followed. My father received 3 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 18 months. My mother received 3 years of supervised probation, along with 500 hours of community service. Restitution was ordered for the full financial loss, $42,000, plus legal costs and interest. To satisfy the restitution order, the court authorized the liquidation of several assets. The house was listed for sale. The Porsche was seized and scheduled for auction. The repair shop equipment was placed under financial review. Everything was handled through the court's financial recovery process. No dramatic speeches, just procedures. When the hearing ended, the bailiff stepped forward to escort my father from the courtroom. As he passed my seat, he paused briefly. His hands were already cuffed. "You've destroyed everything," he said quietly. "The business, the house, the family." I looked at him for a moment. "No," I said. Then I nodded toward the documents on the table. "The records did that." The bailiff guided him toward the door. My mother didn't look at me as she left the room. She walked out slowly beside her attorney, her eyes fixed on the floor. Ethan remained seated in the gallery for a moment after everyone else stood. When our eyes met, he looked away first. Then he followed the others out. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun reflected off the glass buildings across the street. Laura closed one of the document boxes and handed it to me. "You handled that well," she said. "I just answered questions. That's usually the hardest part." We walked down the courthouse steps together. Across the street, Marcus was waiting near a small cafe patio table. Next to him sat 2 other familiar faces, Dr. Ramirez and Carlos Vargas. Marcus raised a hand when he saw me. "Done?" he asked. "It's finished," I said. We sat together for a while. Coffee, a shared plate of nachos, normal conversation. No one talked much about the trial itself. Instead, we talked about hospital shifts. Marcus complained about the diner's broken dishwasher. Vargas joked about how many new trainees faint during their first week in the emergency department. Simple things. The kind of conversation that doesn't carry tension. When the afternoon light started fading, we all stood and said goodbye. I drove back to the garage apartment as the sky turned orange over the city. The place still looked the same. Small staircase, single window glowing softly above the garage. Inside, the air conditioner hummed steadily. I placed the court documents inside the top drawer of my desk. Then I closed it. The paperwork would continue for a while. Restitution processing, credit repairs, legal confirmations. But the core of the situation had already been resolved. The facts had been reviewed. The system had done its job. That night, I made dinner in the small kitchenette. Simple food, pasta and a cup of tea. After washing the dishes, I sat by the window and listened to the quiet hum of the neighborhood. No raised voices, no arguments in the hallway, just the sound of wind moving through the trees behind the garage. And for the first time in a long while, the future felt steady. 3 years later, life looked very different. I had completed the RN Bridge program through the hospital. I worked full-time in the intensive care unit. The hours were long and the responsibility was heavy, but I liked the structure. Helping people through difficult moments has a way of clarifying priorities. My credit score recovered slowly through dispute filings and documentation. Eventually, the fraudulent accounts were removed. The restitution payments handled the remaining balance. I was finally able to open a clean checking account in my own name. The apartment above the garage became a temporary step. After 2 years of saving, I bought a small house on the edge of town. Nothing large, Just a single-story place with a porch and a small kitchen. It was enough. Every morning, I make coffee and sit outside for a few minutes before work. Quiet routine. Simple ownership of my time. Occasionally, I hear updates about my family through old neighbors. My father completed his sentence and now works at a scrap yard outside the city. My mother rents a small apartment and works part-time at a dry cleaner. Last winter, she sent me a letter asking for financial help. I placed the envelope in the fire pit behind my house and watched it burn. The request disappeared into the smoke. Ethan eventually found work at a convenience store near the highway. One evening, I stopped there for gas and saw him behind the counter. He noticed my hospital badge. We exchanged a few quiet words. Nothing more. Then I left. Life moves forward that way. Sometimes quietly, sometimes slowly, but always in one direction. And over time, the distance between old chapters becomes clearer. That distance made room for something new. A life that felt stable, ordered, and entirely my own. Then I waited. 3 years have passed since that day in the courthouse. Life looks different now, but in quiet ways. Nothing dramatic, just steady change. My mornings start early. ICU shifts begin before most people are awake, so I usually get up around 5. I make coffee, step out onto the small porch, and sit for a few minutes before the day begins. The street is quiet at that hour. Sometimes a neighbor walks a dog. Sometimes the wind moves through the trees behind the houses. Mostly it's just stillness. I've learned to appreciate that. Inside the house, everything has its place. The kitchen is small but organized. I keep the counters clear. The paperwork drawer, old court records, credit reports, legal letters, stays closed most of the time now. Once in a while I open it just to remind myself how much has changed. Not to revisit it, just to acknowledge the distance. At the hospital, my work has become routine in the best way. The ICU demands attention. Monitors, medications, quiet conversations with families who are trying to understand difficult news. The pace keeps you focused on what matters immediately in front of you. And strangely, that kind of work brings a lot of peace. You learn quickly that time is valuable. You learn that stability is something you build carefully, one decision at a time. Dr. Ramirez still checks my thyroid levels twice a year. The nodules shrank after my medication was adjusted and, as she predicted, once the stress in my life changed. During my last appointment, she glanced at the chart and smiled. "Everything looks good," she said. Then she added, almost casually, "Funny what happens when someone leaves a difficult environment." I nodded. Sometimes the simplest explanations are the most accurate. My circle of people is small now. Marcus still works at the diner, though he occasionally talks about opening his own food truck. Carlos Vargas runs the hospital training programs and still calls me whenever a new student needs a mentor. And the man who owned the garage apartment, Mr. Caldwell, eventually sold that property but still stops by my house once in a while to check on the porch repairs I'm always slowly finishing. They're not related to me, but they've been present in ways that matter. That kind of presence is enough. About a year ago, I also started seeing someone. Her name is Emily. She works as a respiratory therapist in the same hospital wing. The first time she came over to the house, she walked through the kitchen, looked out the back window, and said something that made me laugh. "You've built a pretty calm place here." I told her that had been the goal. Peace isn't something you find by accident. It usually comes from removing the things that prevent it. Every now and then I hear updates about my family through old neighbors or through people who used to know them. Those updates are brief. My father still works at the scrapyard. My mother still rents the same apartment. Ethan continues working nights at the convenience store. Those facts exist, but they no longer take up much space in my life. One evening last year, I stopped at that store again while driving home from a late shift. Ethan was behind a counter. He looked up, recognized me, and gave a small nod. I returned it. Then I paid for my gas and left. No anger, no conversation needed. Just two people moving through separate lives. And sometimes that kind of quiet distance is the most complete resolution you can have. These days I spend my evenings doing simple things. Cleaning the kitchen, organizing paperwork, watering the small plants on the porch. Once in a while I sit with a cup of tea and review the notes I keep from work, things I've learned from patients, small reminders about how quickly life can change. Those reminders keep everything in perspective. Not long ago, a young trainee at the hospital asked me something after a shift. He had been working 2 jobs while helping support relatives who depended on him for nearly everything. He looked exhausted. "Did you ever feel like people expected you to carry everything for them?" he asked. I told him yes. Then I told him something I had learned a long way. Sometimes the most responsible thing you can do is step back and let systems handle what people won't fix themselves. He thought about that for a while. Then he nodded. Moments like that remind me that situations like mine aren't rare. They just happen quietly. And occasionally someone needs help recognizing when it's time to step away and build something stable of their own. If you stayed with me through this entire story, I appreciate it. Stories like this are easier to understand when we talk about them calmly and honestly. If you'd like, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps this community keep sharing real experiences and thoughtful conversations. And I'm always curious. Leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from and what time it is there right now. It's interesting to see how far these stories travel. Also, when this video ends, 2 other stories will appear on your screen. They're conversations from people who went through different situations but reached similar moments of clarity. You might find those worth listening to as well. For now, I'm going to finish my tea, turn off the porch light, and get ready for tomorrow's shift. That routine has become one of the best parts of my life.